Another version of the Genesis myth says that when man was driven from his original birthplace, he did not go directly to his present state, as commonly believed, but rather first passed through another land, the effects of which journey he still unwittingly bears. When the time to leave arrived, a father said to the departing son, "Once you're out there, remember this. Whenever someone tells you that you can go directly from here to there, know that they are misled and strangers even unto their own kingdom, and understand not its unique topography, plainly laid out before them. The travels of silent beasts are too simple to evolve. A creature must be able to speak of its journey to expand the scope of its journey, and experience that not merely mundane. I think, therefore I am. I feel, therefore I think. I feel, therefore I feel. I feel, I feel." One man blamed the bottle cap for his dislike of the drink. One way to keep from seeing how things really are is to keep talking. As he felt and behaved in ways not expected, a man with a bottle once mused, "There's no predicting the effects of drinking, nor for that matter, those of thinking. And no need to say bottoms up when things are upside down already." Everyone knows how they look and what they think, but who knows how they feel? As part of his own personal exploration, one man undertook a very close study of all the implications of the word how. From behind the sacred screen, the temple oracle said to those there gathered, "When I first told you of the need to know thyself, why did none of you ask, which self?" And after they stood silently for a while, letting this sink in, one man finally said to himself, "How are we to know?" And the mind-reading oracle immediately cried out, How? There you people go again, using words and ideas that subjectively to you sound meaningful and knowingly used, but which in truth are but commonly accepted and comfortable voices, little more than a minimal mental version of squeals of recognition between pigs. What reason would a more realized consciousness have to speak of physical and emotional matters lower than its own level? There was once a prince with an expansive kingdom who only lived in part therein. A man reflected, is the difference between the more conscious and the delusionary, that while they both see non-standard connections and relationships, but one of them understands and benefits therefrom. Ask not for whom the bell tolls how, but rather, how does it continue to do so, and you never ask, why? There was once born a prince with an expansive kingdom, and only through great effort did he come to realize how all corners were connected. There were two brothers who heard this story of the prince, and one of them said, "I think I understand it," and the other said, "I don't like it. It makes me feel, how shall I put it? How? One man blamed his nose for his annoyance at the smells. One way to keep from realizing how dumb you are is to keep talking. No critic is worthy opposition to a warrior, nor deserving of any response. A mystical hero can only be shamed and insulted by one source, and you know who that is. Ode of the Enlightened Apartment Dweller. Don't live up too high or too far below. Try and stay somewhere in the middle, if at all possible, and you can locate it. A man who had studied all the world's major theologies finally put to himself, They picture the gods in heaven to be above man and the demons of hell beneath him. Should not that alone give rise to suspicions about the conceptual limitations of man's earthbound mind? Any theory that doesn't take every possibility into consideration shouldn't even qualify for minimal acceptance as a theory. But hold on there, interrupts one man. If you were to take into account every possibility imaginable, you would not have a legitimate theory. You'd simply have well, I'm not sure what to call it, but it'd for damn sure be a mess. End quote. One man blamed the pain for the ache of his overstuffed stomach. One day the young prince asked the royal thinker, if an awakened warrior cannot be killed and will not commit suicide, then what can be done with him? And the counselor replied, he may be eventually prompted to search for that place within himself that is the individual outlet for the collective energy that is life, a knowledge of which would put him beyond the two deadly possibilities noted in your question. One man blamed the thing that talked, not knowing where else to look. Only those men are interested in discussing things who have no real desire to know what's going on. Life admitted to one guy, yeah, I may sometimes kick men around, but at least I'm fair about it. And the guy had no idea what life was talking about. One man blamed the thing that said, ow, never seeking the source of the pain. Everyone blames the end of the line. Hey, it's the obvious thing to do. One way to keep from realizing how little talk actually amounts to is to keep talking. Coming too close to Istanbul has caused many a traveler to abandon the journey. Nothing slays like success, said the prince, to which a warrior added, praise be. A man with some knowledge in the area once decided that he'd construct a logical, methodical, dependable, and well-behaved system by which men could study things mystical. But thankfully, he broke his mind before he could complete it, or else he might have broke yours. So pondered one man, if you can't affect where you're born, and you can't determine where you'll die, then what's the basis for men's illusion that they choose where they now live, taking into no account that their emotions were their fascist realtor? The speaker said, no matter how educated you are by your peers, there will always be some idea you can't understand. And the voice in the crowd asks, such as, to which the speaker replied, such as understanding the non-physical energies that shape the unique life of man. To infinitely compare man to the lower animals is futile, and to hold him up to the collective's dream of angels is equally unproductive. Man can only be profitably pictured in relation to his own potential, which in turn is conceivable only to those of already futuristic vision. One man named his mind such as, just in the spirit of wishful thinking. One man had such important things to say that he'd only talk about them as long as his voice held out. The actual significance of anything humans think about is in direct, inverted proportion to something or other. A mystic said to his audience, tell me what areas of your life and body you feel most guilty, and I will tell you how conscious you are. And someone in the crowd responded, is this a trick? Why, certainly, said the mystic. What'd you expect? Which, of course, is not what the crowd ever expects. notwithstanding the fact that that's what they're constantly faced with. And life confessed to one guy, yeah, I may mentally mislead men at times, but at least I do it out in the open, right before their eyes. And the guy was in no wise encouraged nor placated. Flocks dream not of the morrow, nor the future do herds celebrate. In parades, the force of great numbers keep possible roamers in line. But fret not, all is not hopeless. For if today there is no joy in Mudville, 'tis only because you submit to being in Mudville. None sail the Titanic save those who queue up at dockside, ticket in hand. When the normal, the ordinary and everyday say, over here, come join us over here, flee them internally like the comforting, blinding plague they unwittingly represent. The majority may or may not be, at any given moment, correct. But as long as it is the voice and thinking of the majority, you can be sure that even when apparently correct, it is useless. But fret not, all is not to no avail, for to the more keen of eye, all that would pull down and shame man is that which is below him in himself, and in the past which is gone and to be forgotten. Query yourself this: if Babble and chatter are signs of an inferior intellect, and men talk much more than does life, apparently, then how can they believe they're in any fashion the superior of life, other than the possibility of it all being an artful illusion, inasmuch as who puts men up to what they say other than life? Then one man coughed up this confession: if mental existence was not so based on trickery and misdirection, I guess it could be taken as serious. And another man held himself down and tortured himself until he admitted that he did not actually know the difference between the torturer and the torturee. After that, he let himself go. Okay then, how can you tell if yours is an inferior intellect? Well, you can, of course. And thereby are the ordinary nicely protected from themselves and the truth. While playing, one kid posed this to a bud: what's the difference between man's routine intellectual explanations of life and his defecation processes? And his pal replied, bottoms up. Okay then, Mr. Smarty Pants, how can you tell? As life caused man to get lost in the woods, it laid down a trail of breadcrumbs tracing his path. This trail being the collective's genetics, the ability to read it being the reward of the awakened. But what have we here? A cross-eyed man in a house of mirrors never feels disoriented. Oh, so that's what we have here. Everyday human intelligence. And a man overhearing this reacts: I don't care how you claim otherwise, such as you just said is most certainly a criticism of man. And don't try to tell me that it's not. I have perfectly good hearing and intelligence, and I hear quite well you criticizing man. And nothing you can say will convince me otherwise. And what do you say to that, he concludes. What indeed can you say to that? As life led man into a woods for which he had no map, it placed within him the potential to develop a transcendental mental compass, which can locate not only where he is now, but from whence he came, along with hints as to the direction in which the unestablished future may lie. A secret that can be revealed is not the secret. For a fraud to succeed, the defrauded must freely participate. Think about that next time you think about how you usually think. According to legend, there was once an extreme mystical order which said that all talk was a form of criticism. As the plane dipped low and its flight became increasingly erratic, someone yelled out, "Well, if you are going to crash, the least you can do is shut off the engines and save us from that god-awful noise." If you're alive, you're going to die. And if your mind is only minimally alive, it believes that everything's going to die. Silly mind. Roger Wilcott, out and about, Mach 5. According to legend, the only mystical orders acceptable are those extreme. Okay? Mach 9. After many decades of dating, one night life finally offered to drive man home. "More trickery, I assume," said a voice in the crowd. I'm going to continue to talk about a certain area to which I was trying to draw your attention, that even amongst us may at first appear, and in fact may turn out to be, even singularly subtle, obscure. Going back to one area that we'd already touched on several times in the past, and the last time I was here, is the general sense, not of me trying to convince you of this, but the general sense, the general reality of there being no widespread positive philosophies, theories, models, religions of man. And it's not to pick on philosophy, religion, or anybody. And it is not to say that man is simply crazy. It's not to say that man is dumb. There's more afoot, and it has to do with this most subtle aspect of man that is less liable to conversation than certainly his physical life of behavior or his mental life of thought and speech. It is somewhere else. And it's connected to the fact, the crude version being that all news seems to be bad news, or, if you like it a bit more sophisticated, that the only news in which people seem to be interested is bad news. And that goes all the way from the so-called news media to taking fiction throughout the ages. 4,000 or 5,000 years worth of Western fiction you can take as being a form of news because it was a form of autobiography of someone at the time. It was a reflection, again, assuming you understand, that was popular enough to be remembered. So anything that we remember now from 4,000 years ago is popular. That is, it was a reflection of the collective of humanity at the time and now even afterwards, which I'm not going to try to explain. Did anybody catch that? That something can now be popular? All right, here we go. Why not off to the side and in a ditch? What I was just saying was this. Let me make it clear before I step off into the real ditch on purpose. If we had anything right now, any scraps that we have from Egypt or Samaria or even Greece, have a bit more fragments. Anything that's here now, what I was apparently saying is, if people are still studying it, if it's still being reprinted, published, but it's being read as required in undergraduate school and Western colleges, then you could say, well, it must have been popular, which it sounds like what I was saying, that whatever we take, if we took a piece of fiction, a drama, you know, the clouds or the birds or something by, anything else by, what was it, Aristophanes? But if we say, well, it was popular, because here it is, we're still doing it, that may or may not be true. It might not have been that popular. I guess the ones I picked out were, but it could be something by somebody else. You could say, well, it was popular, but it may not have been popular. at the time. It may not have been a big seller, but it may be the only thing left by that particular guy, and so we keep republishing it and using it as some example of Greek literature circa 1752 BC or whenever, and it's now become popular 2,500 years after the fact. Don't say it's not possible. Well, an ordinary mind could say, well, I hear what you're saying, assuming it did, and say, but you're just saying because it's the only scrap left of that particular era that we look at as being popular because it's all we have representative of that particular time. But you already admitted it might not have been popular at the time. It might have sunk with nary a trace as far as the public was concerned. So you can't say that it's popular now just because we think it's popular. Oh, yes, I can. And if you don't get it, then you missed it. But back to, notice all the literature. We can fairly well simplify this for those of you with direct, obvious minds. Religion, theology, fiction, it's all simply the arts. It's all an output of man's mind. So looked at, they are all negatively based. They all have a negative picture of man. They all put forward a negative picture of man. It doesn't matter that you can find a chapter, a line, a verse, a paragraph that's an exception to that. It doesn't matter that you can find a piece of literature that seems to give it a shot, taken as a whole. And I'm stretching it to admit that. You simply do not find the output of the human mind that attempts to offer some paradigm, some model, some systematic explanation for man that is positive based. At first you might think, if you take the widest view of what religion is attempting, what it represents as being the best shot man has taken, that you might expect, or if you were an apologist, you might, for religion, you could say, well, they do have a positive basis because they point out the great reward. But notice the great reward, the positive basis, is after death. It does not present man on a positive basis in life. For me to say contraire should be overkill. Now, the rhetorical question I was going to present again to you is why? And there is no educated, city-level answer of any use, because anything you come up with is mere speculation. Anything you come up with will be one side of an argument. It will not have any objective validity to it, because the obvious thing to say is, well, men are stupid. The other side of it would be to say, well, men deserve it. That having a negative view of man is quite well founded. There's more to it. And it has to do with this. I can't point at it directly. I could put it to you in just 2 or 3 words. But as soon as I did, your mind would jump on one side or the other. Your mind would either accept it or argue with it. That's why I said it is almost at a new level of obscurity. Subtlety is a better description than obscure. It just does not lend itself, compared to all the other things of which we have mentioned, that do not readily avail themselves of direct, conclusive verbal descriptions. The area now is even more so. And me talking all around the edges is try before tonight or sometime for you to get some sort of glimpse of what I'm talking about. It's pretty simple, but I'm not going to say it, because if I say it, then it becomes too simple. Why is there no positive view of man? No widespread. And again, I'll admit, you know that there are periodic, spasmodic, low-level, limited appeal attempts to present something positive. normally in the form of one book that somebody might write, some faction, some cult, some passing idea that some guy has and he gets a handful of followers to the idea, but it never, you can almost count of it never lasting half a decade. It's normally a seasonal thing. It'll be popular for a year. I'll admit this also, for those of you that can think of any example, I was about to give you one, but do your own. It may very well be remembered years and years and years and years after. There's several glowing or glaring examples, if you can think of them, in the Western world in the last 100 years, at least several, that they're still repeated. One of them, the founder of it, his name has almost become an eponym for a positive attitude toward man. That is, many educated people could throw out the title of the book this guy wrote, or throw out a title that was descriptive of a certain philosopher or a certain psychologist's attitude. Several people, as I said, I can think of in the last 100 years. And knowing, sophisticated people go, ah, yeah. But they are historical curios. There are no lingering schools, there are no continuing organized efforts of any kind pursuant to a positive attitude. So here we are. All religions have a negative attitude toward man. Forget the, it'll be better after we die. That does not count. That is no more than dreams. That is not part of a systematic view of man. That's a systematic dreaming and hope for of some misunderstood possible future. All religions have a negative view of man. They start right off with it. Genesis, what's the first thing as soon as it gets past the house cleaning? You know, of inventing, you know, creating the universe and doing this and that, suddenly man shows up. What's the first thing that happens? I didn't count, but 2 or 3 lines after God creates man, it's the downfall of man. Right? You got to admit, that's pretty much a solid basis upon which to have a negative view of mortal existence. That the gods create man, I don't recall it actually given a time frame, but just from reading it, it seems like it was just a matter of days or weeks or hell, how about months? Let's give months. Until man just completely, until man operated in such a manner as to deserve a negative view. That even says that God said, well, just shame upon you, get out of here and put a curse on him. All right, all the way from all religions having a negative view of man, and of course that also fits in, or the subsequent to that fits in the idea that man is in need of redemption, that he must be saved, he must be remodeled, but he must be redeemed normally, he must be brought back to some position. If you took another extreme from an ordinary view from religion as being philosophy, that apparently is an intellectual attempt to look into the nature of man as opposed to some spiritual attempt. At first you might think, if you had no great knowledge of philosophy, if you were confronted with, if you had no knowledge of this, and we showed you most religious people, and you got some sense of them, you saw them walk out, and you had 4 or 5, and you saw the way they walked, and you let them speak a few minutes, and you had an ability to see the obvious, and you could see something about them. You didn't have anything to compare it to yet, and that's all right. There's them. Now here come the philosophers. And I bring you out 4 or 5 academic philosophers. And watch them walk, watch them come out, watch them pick up their papers, watch their hand gestures, just look at the way they look, physiologically. Just look at them, and if you had any eyesight, you would immediately realize there's a real, not an imaginary, there is a real distinction between these 2 groups of people, even before they open their mouth. But if I let the religious talk to you first, and you heard that, and then I stopped it, and I said, well, now notice, they gave you a quick overview of all the world's major theologies. And you realize they were all negative. If you chop off man's death and all that they dream of and speculate past that, but up until that point, it is a totally negative view of man. It presents man only as worthy of disrepute. You would have to say, well, yeah, I see that. I go, all right, now this other group, they're known as philosophers. They attempt to use logic. They attempt to use simply what they can see and what the mind tells them without any uncertainty must be true. or if they do theorize, they present it as absolute personal speculation based upon this and this facts, as opposed to religion's faith. Oh, well, this is what we think, or this is what, we've got some piece of paper, some scraps of writing that says that God said thousands or millions of years ago when he talked to men. And so I present to you, I say, you do see the difference, that the first group are dealing in speculation, things they not only cannot prove it, they use that as one of the banners, or one of the foundations of their view, that it's based upon faith, that we cannot, by our mind, understand what's going on. So it's on faith. And you said, all right, I got that. Now, so at this second group, I'm about to speak to you now, that you saw walk out and sit down and check. They're philosophers, and they attempt to use the mind and to deal only with what can actually be seen or at least theorized on a basis that is supported by some concrete evidence and specific observation. And you go, okay. That's all right, I'm going to let them talk. And they stand up and I say, wait a minute. Would you expect that they're going to present a different picture of man? And since I made you up, I'll speak for you. And you go, well, yeah. Based upon what you said. And I said, well, at least this much, even though we do not know what each person, there are different schools of philosophical thought in the same way that that first group, there are different religions. You know, Buddhism, Islam, Judaism, that they seem to have different views, although they all claim to be religion. You go, okay. Now, so the guy's about to talk, that apparently are striving for a strictly intellectual assault, survey of life, as opposed to trying to go on the faith of how things may be and might come to pass to be. These guys, would you expect that their view of life, that their model of man is going to be as negative as the religious? More, less, different? I mean, just what would you expect based upon that already? Then speaking for you, I would say that you would be well expected that you would say, well, based upon that, based upon what we've seen with what you call the religious, then based upon that, I would expect these so-called philosophers to have, if not a positive picture of man, at least a less negative one. Whew. Thank you, thank you. Is that true? No, not true. They may slow dance around the subject a bit. They may spend 200 or 300 pages in their magnum opus, each one of them, before they get down to the fact that life sucks. Because I know real philosophers are not that crude. They end up making a veiled, or they end up making unstated comparisons, which end up being a veiled critique of everyone but themselves, or the intelligence of everyone but themselves. Did I get that out finally? They end up criticizing man, and they do have a poor view of man, but they consider it to be on an intellectual basis, which it is compared to the extremely religious. But look at all the world's major philosophers. Don't go do it. I mean, it'd be bad enough if anyone thought I was encouraging them to go study all the world's major religions or to go visit them in person to find out, you know, what's going on if you haven't. But that'd be bad enough. Do not go and try to read all the great schools of philosophy. Unless they make a Cliff's Notes of it and you do it and get a quick scan of them in like 20 minutes. Even philosophically, the views of man are simply this, and rather than having to just limit it to the major theologies of the world and the major philosophical schools, all you've got to do is look at each person, look at the common intelligence, the common view of men in general, and it is that life, that is man, they have a negative view of man. And it becomes confused with whether life sucks or man sucks. Because if you have a negative view of man, then it doesn't matter what life is, which is the imaginary, the hoped-for trapdoor that God represents to the ordinary. Instead of life, they look at it as God, but it's still a hoped-for way out. But if it exists way out. That is, beyond life. Now back to the original heart of the question. What could be afoot that makes men only have a negative view of man, only are interested in bad news? I can keep rephrasing that, but that's all it amounts to, is they only have, collectively speaking, commonly speaking, men only have an interest in bad news. And I mean that in the widest possible sense. Like I said, all the way from, obviously nowadays, since we're overrun by the media, because that didn't prove anything, because you're so overrun, nobody normally notices it. But I mean, it's an anomaly to have anything but horrendous news reported. And it's not the news media, it's not some conspiracy, and it is simply that's all, because the media, you ever notice, by the way, there's another example of the limitations, the normally unnoticed limitations of the human intellect. A very common phrase, rhetorical poser, that is accepted as a sure sign of one's intelligence is to say, disconnected with what I just pointing out about bad news, or me pointing out that films and literature only celebrate and glorify the lower aspects of man. In line with that, and the bad news now, is men saying, well, the question is this: does art imitate life, or life imitate art? And then strike one of those good Mussolini poses like, hey, ain't I full of me? You know, well, no, aren't I intelligent? And it passes. It passes. And all it is another version of, me wonders, how much of man is the product of his environment, and how much of his genetic basis? And it's, I don't know, men's always been impressed with each other. One can do the first one about art imitating life, and the others go, my, and then someone go, yes, but that reminds me, is man a product of his nature or his nurture? And the guy doing about art and life, then he has to go, yeah, you too. And it passes. I mean, it's taken as a rhetorical truism, even though it answers nothing, but it seems to pose the kind of question that is at the heart of the meaning of life. And they pose the question as though that question is right on the threshold of the supreme wisdom, the key to unlocking everything. And everyone goes, you know what that's, when I say another example of the limitations, that is to look out into a world of even-numbered dimensions, to a reality of even-numbered dimensions. And the only thing you can see in the ballroom of reality are dance teams, and everyone knows it. And yet what passes for an attempted, sophisticated, damn near insightful piece of intelligence is to go, in that dance team out there, which one is going backwards and which one is dancing forward? Or none of these are necessarily going to be absolutely instantly enlightening, because I am now taking apart the dimensions. Or they go, in that dance team out there, how come there's only one? Or, well, maybe some of you, or they go, in that dance team out there, where do the hands of the person going forward stop and the hands of the other one going backwards begin? They are attempting, they believe that it's possible, that it is genuine, it is called for, to try and separate reality. I can reverse that and say that they are unwittingly doing that. But by saying, does art imitate life or life art? That's to believe that in a dance team, that you woke up in the Garden of Eden and you're part of a dance team. If you had any sense, you look around and the garden's a dance team. All the animals are a dance team. The animals in the tree are a dance team. You and the trees are a dance team. You and the garden are a dance team. The clouds and the elephants are a dance team. Yes, but which came first? Did anybody get anything out of that? To wonder why there's bad news. The ordinary mind will go, all right, if bad news is not specific enough. Go back to my other example from the other night that I can point out that all popular entertainment or film, all films, just generally speaking, films present a negative view of man. Let's say films, the late 20th century. And you go, well, yeah, I agree. Yeah, I agree. No great observation there. And then you could say, well, yeah, but is art simply imitating life? Is that why we have all these violent films? They're getting worse and worse? Is it simply a reflection of the increasingly violent times in our everyday life? Or are we becoming more violent in our everyday lives because of the violence portrayed on the screen? And if you stand in a group of intelligent, educated, that is, ordinary people, they will all go, they will take the question as being worthy of extreme deliberation. That's what I was trying to get you to see, is this nodding like the question is important. Before we get anywhere else, that the question is valid, and it's not valid. And as long as you think that way, then what you call thinking is not really deserving the term. But they take just the question. The question is extremely significant, deserving of a deep reflection, a study. Not only is that not true, but then the majority of the time, after you pay the necessary service to show that you are equally as sophisticated and insightful as the person who posed the question, the rhetorical question again, after that, the majority of the time, your mind takes sides, which is not an answer. No matter what your education, no matter how you preface it by saying, well, I've thought about this for years, as a matter of fact. I, in fact, wrote my doctoral on that. I, in fact, have written several books on that matter. I, in fact, am prepared to say, in all due humility, that I believe that I am certainly within spitting range of a solid, objective answer to the question. You are an idiot. That is your ordinary. Because that is not an understanding of it. Because an understanding of it, anyone who understands it dismisses the question. The question is nothing. I've tried another way. Tonight I wrote one, I do them all the time, that says that no critic is worthy opposition to a hero. Same thing. Anyone who will stand there and hear the question, or have the question presented that says, does art imitate life, or life imitate art? And anyone who goes, is an idiot. This is where, this was not the central point tonight, but here again is the subtle area in which it sounds like criticism. And of course, I'm overdoing it, saying you're an idiot. You're not an idiot. You're an ordinary person. You may be the head of the philosophy department at some major university. You may have an IQ of 185, but you're an idiot. You do not understand anything if you will hear such a question and go, you understand what I'm saying is you entertain the question. Now forget what answer you come up with for me to say, you want me to play all the parts right quick. Now, so if you even entertain the question, you're an idiot. and a fictitious person hears this, and they go, well, you can't say that because you don't know what my answer is going to be to the question. There's the point. If you think that you have an answer to the question, if you think that you must think about, well, let's see, which is the most important, man's nature or his nurture? Well, let me stop right, don't go any further. Not for my benefit. Don't go, well, let me think about it, man. Don't bother. And if you had any sense, is what I've been trying to hint to you, to your own mind. It's not your problem with life. It's not somebody trying to trick you. There you are, you're in your mind. Two splendid people, I'm sure both of you are. You've been trying to sharpen it, you've tried to feed it and educate it, and there you are. And someone says, the most important question, no matter how you slice it, no matter what position from which position you originally start, the one question that a man has got to finally come to grips with is man a product of his environment or his genetics? And you in your mind, well, let's put it, be a bit more, there you in your mind stand, go, well, all right. And you're around other educated, decent people, and your mind goes, that's a good one, or whatever your mind says. You've already thought about it, and your mind begins to kind of warm up because your mind has either plagiarized something that somebody's already written about it, or you originally plagiarized it, and you twisted one or two words around to where now you're going to pass it off as your original insight. And you're in your mind just having a great old time. It's a fine hobby. It's a hobby. But to believe that you're really, or now I'm getting somewhere, and that your mind is about to come out with a good answer or an extremely insightful speculation, you're an idiot. If you entertain the question, that should tell you. If your mind goes, well, let's think about that, that's when you should take one of my numerous stories, my non-sequitorial stories of a man talking to his mind and slapping his mind around and all that stuff, is when your mind goes, now they're getting into an area that you and I can deal with. You should be saying, hey, don't say you and I. You friggin' idiot. Don't drag me into this. And of course what you should be trying your best to do is to keep your teeth locked together so that your mind cannot make an idiot out of you. But you do understand, in ordinary company, when I say make an idiot out of you, it may speak up if you can't control it. And you won't appear to be an idiot. Other people around you, other educated, sophisticated people may go, we never gave you your rightful due. We didn't understand that you were a fellow idiot. I mean, that you were educated. We didn't understand that you were one of us. We didn't understand that you were thoughtful and reflective. You go, to entertain such a question is every admission you ever need to make to yourself. If you still think, well, here's what you should be doing, I really make it hard to understand, impossible to understand. In spite of all this, I know your own thinking, because your thinking, if you're sane and ordinary, your thinking was based upon the same structures, run from the same energies that everyone else's mind was. So, when your mind hears a question like, well, does art imitate life or life imitate art? Your mind is going to consider the question. So, you miss the point if you just think that you individually have an idiot for a mind. It's supposed to do that. So it's like we all, if you recall, I said all people have an idiot Uncle Charlie who lives up in the attic. They've locked him up there, and the man is completely deranged. If he's part of the family, who wants to talk about him? What you should do, once you know he's there and you know his condition, is just don't speak of him. And that's the way decent families used to do, especially in the South. At least around the turn of the century, if you had an old uncle or aunt or a cousin that, became a little wacko, you would try to lock them up in a room, and you never did mention it. If anything, you'd say, oh, she died. And nobody'd ever mention her again because you just didn't talk about things like that. That's the kind of attitude you should have about this. Except rather than be deranged, most people take especially the response to those kinds of questions that seem deserving of great consideration. Any part of your mind that thinks that is deserving of consideration, and I just picked that one out because it's sort of an extreme philosophical one, but all of the serious questions to which men ordinary men, give their attention. They're all just bullshit. And if you find that your mind entertains them at all, like, well, now wait a minute, I got to think about this. There's nothing to think about. It has been decided for you to think, well, maybe I can figure this out. Oh, no, no. That possibility has already been precluded. There you go, well, wait a minute, you don't know how I'm going to think. Oh, yes. Well, you don't know how I'm going to think, yes or no. I know. Yeah, but. Now back to the waning minutes, in case Newton or Cochrane was here. To the area that I threatened to try and drag you toward earlier. Men can only hear, on a widespread basis, descriptions, models, views of man that are negative. Let me jump back to even the myth of creation, the one most prevalent and salient in the Western world from the Old Testament. That man got off on the wrong foot, that man created his own negative basis by running amok. And how did he do so? According to that story, that he ate of a forbidden fruit. I've not changed the subject. We're still talking about bad news. And why? Men cannot see its source. If you take the two main interpretations of that, what is the forbidden fruit? No one with any walking around intelligence takes it literally. Even those in the ordinary throes of religious fervor assume it's a metaphor. But what does it represent? To the most simple-minded, the forbidden fruit was sex. That God told in some way, for whatever reason, told Adam, there's one fruit you cannot taste. The simple, for thousands of years, and there are other versions, but even in the West, that the simple-minded, physical people, the throwbacks, even those amongst us, even those amongst you, take it to be sex. At the other end, at the ordinary level, is a more sophisticated view, and they take it to be a metaphor for knowledge of a forbidden nature. The secret of life itself, the knowledge of what life is, the knowledge of what God was. But a forbidden knowledge. Now there you have a wide range. From all ordinary views, that is inclusive. That the forbidden fruit of which man tasted and which brought about his downfall, which had put him on a negative running track from there on out, that the views range from, I'm suggesting sex, it cannot get more basic than that, since it was not obviously a literal fruit. That is, it was not the process of eating, because man had to eat to live, so that couldn't have been forbidden. And so to taste a forbidden fruit, the most basic possible metaphorical, the reality behind the metaphor would have been sex. That God told man, don't fool with that. And sure enough, first thing he did, Eve looked around and she said, don't point that thing at me. And after that, it was all over. Anyway, that the forbidden fruit was sex, which is one end. It's about as crude, as basic, as physical. And I'm saying crude with no critical intent to it. It's just the crudest compared to the other end of it. From the ordinary interpretation, the forbidden fruit was knowledge, which is nowadays probably considered to be, well, I know it's considered to be the more sophisticated of the two interpretations. That Adam actually ate of this plant, this fruit that gave him the knowledge, brought him too close to the gods. Or sometimes it's been interpreted it would have been the knowledge of the gods. Then they can't explain, well, if he ate it, then how come he couldn't do better than he did? But at any rate, it's to ordinary minds, it's just a myth anyway. So there you have it. Now, right quick, move to one other thing that we've been talking about, and let me do it again with a different view. The story of or these stories, and the one I've repeated several times was somebody went to Jesus and said, I have been trying to live a redemptive life. I've been trying to live by your teaching, which, no matter how they put it, was supposed to create a more conscious person, to evolve me in this lifetime. And he says, I have been doing it, and in fact, I have lived up to such letters of the law as I can refrain from killing. And Jesus says, all right, good. And he says, yeah, but I have not changed. And he says, all right, now what you've got to do is refrain from thinking about it. He went, That's the same relationship as believing that the forbidden knowledge was sex at one end and knowledge at the other. This guy says, I have lived by the law. I have changed my behavior. Or at least behaviorally speaking, I can refrain from doing a certain thing that you say is forbidden. And he says, yeah, but now you've got to go over and to quit thinking about it. It's got to go from physical, which would be the behavior of it. And he says, well, I don't try to kill people anymore. I don't try to take away my neighbor's wife. I do not try to steal my neighbor's grain. And Jesus said, okay, if you can do that, that's fine. But now what you got to do is quit thinking about it. You have got an open hole there in the middle that no one looks at. Because you can affect, I'm just using from ordinary appearances, a man can apparently affect his behavior. A man can refrain from engaging in sex. A man can refrain from trying to steal from other people. And he can refrain, so it appears. I've got to make it simple, the last minute. He can apparently stop thinking about sex, especially if he's 70 years old, which is why men like to be considered wise. But he can apparently have some effect over his thinking about it. He can apparently have some effect over him thinking about wanting to steal. That it becomes less of a driving mental activity in his mind. Man starts out behaving in some way. He ends up, or simultaneously, once you're a sophisticated, ordinary person, also thinking, and you have attitudes, positions, theories, teachings that apparently address both ends of it. And yet neither one comes to any conclusion. That the story of Jesus, like any of the stories, did not go far enough because the mind can't draw it any further. The guy says, all right, I have changed the way I behave. I can control that some. Jesus said, fine, now what you got to do is control what you think. And the guy went, shoo, and wandered away. End of story. Or ellipsis. It's going to take him the rest of his life to deal with that. That's a nice story. That's the best they can do. But if the story had actually been five-dimensional, the guy would go, good, I'm glad I asked you. And he'd gone away for another 20 or 30 years and come back and says, all right, now I can quit thinking about the things that I can refrain from doing. And Jesus went, well, now we're getting somewhere. Now, what I want you to do is to quit. What drives man at this end and what drives man at that end? It's the very thing that is never discussed. It is the very thing that you can point at. As I said, I could just tell you the name. I could just tell you a word right now. And say, well, so what? And you could go, well, people can talk about it. I talk about it. Oh, no. Well, you may whine about it. You may complain about it. But don't say you talk about it, not in the sense that it has some potential meaning, that it has some possible use. You cannot say, if I said the word, you cannot say that either you or humanity in general has any useful, productive view, have ever attempted one, of that area. They pick out the two that you can, the physically obvious you can do something about, or if you do not, it's obvious your lack of doing it. And thought-wise, you can ask a man, and he can give something resembling to him a satisfactory answer if you say, have you quit thinking as much about that subject as you did? Normally, he will say, this is getting pretty thin, cut pretty thin. If he can curb his tongue, if he can change the behavior of his tongue, that is normally indicative, it is accepted by most people, and I'm not arguing the point, as being a change in their thinking. And there's some validity. But if you can do both of those, to use my story of the guy with Jesus, that instead of him saying, now you've got to work on thinking about it, you've got to refrain from thinking about it, and the guy went, and went off, and that's the end of it. Because with ordinary minds, that is the end of it. That's as far as the ordinary mind could ever take anything. But the guy should have come back. Our kind of version of it, a transcendental version was, the guy comes back. And I said 20 or 30 years, it certainly wouldn't have been that long. If it took him 30 years to do that with a body, it would be a fraction of that time. After Jesus said, all right, now you got to do this, he'd go, In fact, a Zen version of that Jesus story, the guy went, and maybe walked outside and smoked a cigarette and come back and said, all right, I've done it. Because it should almost be that fast to him go, geez, I should have realized that. No offense, but Jesus. And then he'd come back in. And Jesus say, all right, you got that? And he went, and then he said, all right, now, quit. No. And then perhaps ellipsis. Then perhaps story to be continued. Then the guy'd go, ooh, I'm not sure that enough cigarettes and walking around the backyard spitting in the world to do that, but hey, gotcha. And he'd go. That's why it can't be talked about. Or, to put it another way to you, that's why, as I point out, not just me, but I was using me of all the letters, all the questions that I get, is all more or less the same thing. All of man's theologies, all of man's philosophies are more or less what? That all get on? All right. And as always, being 50 minutes late.